Joining us now, the co-host and temporarily so the only host of the Bob McCowan podcast, and from our fair province, no less, John Shannon joins us once again here on Sekeres and Price. How are you, John?
Doing great. BC Hockey Hall of Fame tonight, boys, in Penticton. Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook, Ron Toigo's 2007 Vancouver Giants. Milan Lucic is here. So we've actually had a fair bit of fun already.
Keith might arrive by water. He can just put the boat in the water and come right across the lake, and he's there for the ceremony, for heaven's sakes.
Let me just say that Duncan will certainly enjoy coming across the water more than giving a speech. So,
you don't suspect he'll be that verbose at the podium?
He might set a record for the shortest speech in the history of the Hall of Fame.
Do you think is that just him, or is that because of the honor and just having the spotlight on him?
I think that's just Duncan now.
Yeah.
You get to a certain point at his age where the most important thing to him is family. He's talked to him last night. He's all geared up to be coaching his 10-year-old son's hockey team this year. So he's I think Duncan was never the most verbose player. You guys both interviewed him.
Yeah.
He did all his talking on the ice, and sitting in front of 500 people like they will tonight. That's not the normal way that he's used to talking with people. So he does it with a stick and a puck, not necessarily with his voice.
Brent's probably going to be a little bit more excited about it. Brent will wear his emotions on his sleeve a little bit more readily, huh?
I think so. And both of them were. There was an event last night, and they were both welcomed into the Hall of Fame family, and both were great. So it's there's something really special. People in the province should really be proud of what the BC Hockey Hall of Fame have done. They have worked hard at it. It's part of the arena project here in Penticton. Jim Houston's the chairman right now and has done a magnificent job. And so the Hall of Fame is important here. And I think if you look across the country, I think BC's done it better than anywhere else. And what you're seeing now is you're seeing other provinces, Alberta, Saskatchewan, copy what they have done here in Penticton.
John, a little bit of Canuck news this week, and I think it caught some people off guard that we kind of felt like maybe we're into the dog days of summer and there wasn't going to be much news. But the departure of Derek Clancey, and we don't see this an awful lot where management types, make lateral moves unless they get a promotion. And in fact, I think that's somewhat frowned upon in the National Hockey League unless you're, moving to climb the corporate ladder. Did it surprise you? Had you heard rumblings that Derek was looking to get out at all, or is there more to this story?
I don't know if there's more to the story, Jeff. The one thing I think it surprised a lot of people in Toronto simply because Brad has such a huge staff already. He's got more people at his disposal on the hockey operations side than anyone else in the National Hockey League. They have a bigger budget than anyone else. Brad probably has 4 times the amount of money and 4 times the amount of people that he had in Calgary. So to go out and add somebody, I think surprised a lot of people, both in Vancouver and in Toronto. The thing about when you move to a new team, and that is, I think there has to be a comfort factor, and that he has to have people around him that you can trust and confide in, knowing how you're going to build your operation. Someone can help guide you and be part of the solution. I suspect that's exactly what happens. Brad was very comfortable with what Derek did in his time in Calgary. So to me, this was one of those ones where you think that, he had a relationship with Jimmy and Patrick in Pittsburgh. But I think that his time in Calgary with Brad was one that had him, saying, I'd like to work with my friend again. And that's, I really think that's why it came about.
So you think this is an isolated incident then, that this isn't the first of many trying to flee the Canuck front office?
I don't think so. I think it's funny, we're going through this time in the NHL, particularly in Western Canada, where people are leaving and we get a little thin-skinned about things.
Sure.
What's going on in Winnipeg? Well, people are leaving. What's wrong with us? What's wrong in Calgary? I don't think you can look at the front office jobs. Here, and I don't know the figures, but I can guarantee you that Derek Clancey's making more in Toronto than he did in Vancouver.
Mm-hmm.
And in the end, When you have a family or you have a career, making money and making hay in a very, very volatile sports world, that's probably the most important thing.
The one interesting nuance is it's not exactly a small management group here in Vancouver, but it's an even bigger one in Toronto.
Oh, yeah.
You almost wonder if your voice gets diluted. Now, he's close to Brad, so I suspect he's got confidence that he won't be diluted, but there would be that perception possible at the very least.
Well, and I don't want to over speculate, but that general manager in Pittsburgh is still trying to build up his front office, and so where would bodies for his front office come from? Well,
right.
They come from a place that he's very familiar with, and so you have to wonder if this isn't even a proactive move by Brad Treliving to say, okay, I know I'm going to be losing a couple of bodies or a body here or there. They are. I mean, let's face it. The day that they got rid of Kyle, Jason Spezza walked out the door. So are there going to be more people leaving the Maple Leafs and going to Pittsburgh? And so this is Brad's way of trying to find a way to have his own people in key spots in the front office.
Did you find it interesting that Jim Rutherford weighed in on this, that he released a personal statement on this, or do you think that's just a customary? Because, again, he's trying to take the step back and leave all that stuff to Patrick Allvin, and yet he found a way to insert himself here into this story.
Well, I think that speaks to the relationship that they had in Pittsburgh. I think it speaks to, listen, we've all been in these scenarios, and certainly in the hockey world, where you get disappointed when somebody you think you're nurturing and you're mentoring leaves, albeit for a bigger, higher profile job. But so at a certain point, I'm sure that Jimmy felt he had an obligation to say something. And you're right. He is you guys know it better than I do. He is trying to take the step back. But at the end of the day, he still is the president of hockey operations.
I mean, Clancy's got a good reputation. There is a loss here for the Canucks, isn't there? I mean, people seem to really like the fact that he's a little mix of new and old and a pretty sharp guy.
Oh, no. His reputation is solid. It was solid before he got to Vancouver. And again, I just think there's a comfort level for Brad Treliving to say, okay, I mean, let's face it, just to put it in perspective in Toronto, when they did their scouting meetings, they had to move their scouting meetings in the last 2 or 3 years from a boardroom to the Raptors practice facility. They had so many bodies. And it was so that speaks to how many people are involved. And I'm not sure Brad knows everybody's name yet. So to have a familiar face, a familiar voice around you is going to be a big part. And I think that Derek fills a void for Brad on a day-to-day basis, that he can pick up the phone and say, hey, here's what I'm thinking, what I'm doing. You know how I think better than these guys know how I think. What do you think of where we're going?
Don't want to turn this into a segment on the Leafs necessarily, but they went and found Guy Boucher somehow this week. He's back in the National Hockey League. Just a broader sort of question, John, because we saw it with Travis Green earlier this summer as well. There are so many qualified coaches out there, and obviously it's a numbers game. And so Travis takes an assistant coaching job or an associate coaching job in New Jersey, Guy Boucher with head coaching experience. And this isn't new. John Stevens was on the staff of the Vegas Golden Knights. But it feels now like this is the norm around the National Hockey League, where most teams have guys with head coaching experience in an associate or an assistant capacity.
Well, and I think you have to look at Guy Boucher and say, okay, what strength does he bring to the position? And really, I think what they're trying to do with Spencer Carberry moving to Washington as the head coach, I think they're trying to find somebody who can really manage the power play and make sure the power play is as effective as it can be. And he's a brain trust that way. He's one of those guys that works well with special teams. We will never forget him for the famous 1-3-1 in Tampa, but that
was the 1.3-1, right?
Yeah. That's right. But what he does bring to the table is how to manage a power play. And the other thing, I was talking to somebody inside the Leaf organization yesterday. You have to give Sheldon Keefe some credit I think in this scenario, in that darn well, as volatile as things could get in Toronto if they get off to a bad start, everybody's going to say, well, his replacement's on the staff. And Sheldon has enough confidence in his own ability and in relationships with people to say, come and let's work together and let's make it part of that. And that, to me, that was impressive for what Sheldon's going to be. And we haven't heard what his extension is going to be like, if there is in fact one to come down the pipe at a certain point this summer.
I don't know if we asked you about your interview with Mike Babcock the other day. He was on your show. What did Mike sound like? A guy who had found God or something? Had he changed his ways, seen the light, all that sort of stuff, or is he the same old Mike Babcock to you?
I think it was the latter, Blake.
Yeah,
I didn't see much change in him. And we talked about this on the show. Actually, he's one of the greatest deflectors of all time. You can ask him question A, and he will say in his own mind, "Well, I'm going to give you answer D," because he doesn't really want to answer question A, and he will guide the conversation. But I think he talked about some of the misfortunes, not necessarily specific situations. And that how he deals with players and how he thinks he's grown and being away from the game has been good for him. But it's still, he's almost evangelical in his discussion of the game, his love of the game, his love of coaching. And he's been given a really good situation with a lot of good young players, including Adam Fantilli and Kent Johnson, that could make a difference. And let's face it, the blueprint we've seen the last 2 or 3 years, almost to Jeff's point, not necessarily hiring them as assistant coaches, but head coaches, is bring in a veteran coach to guide people, like Pete DeBoer did, and Jim Montgomery, a guy who had been a head coach before in Boston. So owners do that. Owners say, well, listen, look what they're doing. It's a copycat league. So to bring Mike Babcock in and give him a chance to coach a team that was, let's face it, was a real disappointment last year, despite the injuries. He's going to make a difference there, and quickly.
John, there are a few free agents that are still out there, but really the dust has settled after July the 1st. Carolina went out. They got Michael Bunting. They got Dmitry Orlov, who sort of was the big fish on the back end. We know that that's a terrific organization and has been a really good team for a while now, but they haven't been able to get over the hump. Do these pieces make them markedly better? Is this enough for Carolina? No,
I don't think so, Jeff. I listen. We've talked about it, I think, for 3 or 4 years now. Is who? Well, look at Vegas. Who is the engine that drove things on the defensive side? It was obviously Alex Pietrangelo. As far as the forwards, it was Mark Stone. Matthew Tkachuk did what he did in Florida. Who's that guy in Carolina? Who's the guy to say, boys, jump on my back and we're going to get through this 3-1 deficit and we're going to win 4-3. They've never had that body. They've never had that guy to score the big goal at the big time. And that has been their issue. They thought Max Pacioretty was going to be that guy. Then he went and had the Achilles issue twice in that period of time. It's been really difficult. There's lots of so many positives in Florida, but it's such a team mentality. There isn't that one individual that can take them over the top. That's why I think that they're talking about Tarasenko, the one guy that has a flashiness to him and the ability to score that one big goal to change momentum. I think that's really what their thought process is there. But until they get that guy, I just don't see them doing anything more than, we'll get to the conference final, but can you win the big one? I just don't think so.
If you're a betting man, is Erik Karlsson in Pittsburgh sometime soon?
Well, we know Kyle wants to make a splash.
Mm-hmm.
And we know that the window in Pittsburgh is, slowly dropping to the point where Sid and Evgeny and Chris Letang are going to be retired within 2 or 3 years.
And they're getting a little more vocal themselves about maybe getting a big splash, right?
Right, right.
Yeah.
And the big part of this is this summer I think we've seen Sydney more involved in this whole process than ever before. I mean, it being involved in sitting with Kyle before he was hired, and making sure that Sydney was happy. This is the Fenway Sports Group mentality. We decided we were going to go with the veteran players. Sydney's got 2 more years on his deal, so you know what, Sid, make sure that you are happy with Kyle Dubas, because obviously the previous administration did not really understand what the players wanted, and it didn't work. And Kyle's smart enough to know that Sydney's a pretty good hockey guy and probably has a career with the Penguins after he plays, but is in a position to, have some influence now. We don't normally see superstars in hockey try to create influence. Wayne never really did that. Mario did it by necessity because they owed him so much money. But from that perspective, to see Sid this vocal, this involved, I think is a positive. So the answer is I do think he ends up in Pittsburgh, but hopefully they haven't given up enough of the regular roster, guys like Jake Gensel, in order to get to the point where they can still contribute and get deeper in the playoffs, let alone make the playoffs.
It's funny. I mean, Karlsson had an all-world season, obviously, in San Jose. It kind of feels like he has one foot out the door there, so he's expecting a deal to go. But, is he the piece? Is he the piece that the Pittsburgh Penguins need? Well, you
can't really talk about his time in San Jose of being a real difference maker. Sure, there was the one playoff run, but they ended up losing to St. Louis, I think. But if you go back to his last year in Ottawa and the run to the conference final in Ottawa, he was the dominant defenseman in the National Hockey League. And that was on 2 broken heels. This guy can be a difference maker. And if you put him around other elite players, if you put him with Sidney Crosby, even for a short period of time, a couple of years, it could be something that's really important to be a difference maker for the Penguins. And Kyle needs to make a splash. Kyle's done a lot of good things in Pittsburgh so far, and being accessible, talking with people, making people feel warm and fuzzy in the organization. But he knows he needs to make a splash in the next couple of years in order to keep this team relevant.
Before you go, we'll let you dunk because you told us a week ago, guys, Hockey Night in Canada stuff. Come on, it's not happening. And you didn't. I don't even think you were seeing it from a Scoops standpoint. You were just like, that's just not happening, and it's just not. It doesn't sound like there's any changes. Never mind sweeping changes. It doesn't sound like there's any. I mean, do you think we're wrong in that regard? Do you think literally the whole crew's back?
I think it's still difficult to judge.
Yeah.
But I certainly think, and I was at an event with Ron on Monday, where we had a long talk about this kind of thing, and it certainly sounds like that crew that appeared on Saturday night is going to be the crew that's going to be on Saturday nights, and it was a difficult time. The only reason I said what I said, Blake, was it is just horrific to be at home and read your name, whether it's in the old days in the newspaper or on social media, and have people phone and say, "Are you okay?" And you're saying, "I don't know what you're talking about." And so the truth was that if there was writing on the wall, it was in invisible ink. And so from a personal perspective, I don't want to comment on the production. I don't want to comment on the abilities on the air, but on a personal perspective, to read all of that was really sad and embarrassing. And I'm glad that there's been a little clarity between Ron and certainly Kevin Bieksa this week.
A little less sad is the health of your compadre there, Bob McCown. Comeback trail continuing for him?
Yeah. Getting better at home, walking better, talking better. So our fingers and toes are crossed that as we get closer to the end of summer, that Bob will be back in the captain's chair.
Yeah, get that brain rewired a little bit and get him back in there talking. Thanks for doing this, John. Appreciate it. Best to Bob if you talk to him, and we'll talk to you soon.
Have a great weekend, boys.
This Sekeres and Price clip brought to you by Applewood Auto Group. And remember,
it's all good at Applewood.